Hello and welcome to PTV World. I am Jawad Tehami. You're watching special live transmission regarding the 48th session of the OIC Council of Foreign Ministers. This is a historic day, 22nd and 23rd of March 2022. This is the 48th session that is underway right now as we speak. And Prime Minister Imran Khan also addressed this high-level moot. So 57 Islamic countries foreign ministers and their delegations are participating. The theme of this particular high-level moot is partnering for unity, justice and development. Over 100 resolutions on different issues are to be considered by the foreign ministers, and they would be agreed upon and would be later on implemented as well. Now, the foreign ministers of these countries will be participating in the Pakistan Day parade that will be held on Pakistan Day tomorrow on the 23rd of March as the guests of honor. And we have seen Chinese foreign minister and the state councillor Mr. Wang Yi was also specially invited as the guest of honor, and he is the only non-OIC foreign minister to have participated in this. And to talk about the significance of this particular high-level moot that is being held in Islamabad, I am today joined by an esteemed panel of guests in the studio. I'm joined by Lieutenant General retired Talat Masood, and he's a senior analyst. And I'm also joined by Air Vice Marshal retired Mr. Ikramullah Bhatti, who is a senior analyst, and Ms. Najma Minhas, who is a senior journalist. Thank you, all of you, for your time at PTV World during this special transmission regarding the 48th session of the Council of Foreign Ministers of the OIC. I'll begin the discussion with you, General Talat. Talking specifically about Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan's keynote address during this session, he highlighted multiple points. He shared the salient features of the state of Medina, and he also highlighted the atrocities and the brutalities by the Indian authorities in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. He also highlighted the issue of Afghanistan. To begin with the issue in Afghanistan, how do you think OIC can collaborate? Earlier we saw in the previous session a humanitarian fund was established. Now we saw the Islamic Development Bank's president saying that the charter to operationalize this has been signed.
Well, I think it's extremely important from the point of view of Islamic unity to show it in terms of trying to definitely help Afghanistan at this point, because Afghanistan and the people of Afghanistan are going through one of their worst periods. And obviously, because Afghanistan is under a lot of restrictions and has, its economy is in shambles, it is unable to sort of really feed its people. There is a very large percentage of people which are likely to sort of go hungry. And so I think firstly, they need assistance, monetary assistance, and their funds which were frozen by the Americans, they have also not been released in the way that they should have been. So I think they need financial help. They need also help in terms of supplying them with the essentials so that their people could be fed. And also I think the other thing is that we should leave them alone, as the foreign minister and everyone and the Prime Minister also mentioned that. So I think it is important that we do not meddle in their affairs, do not give an impression to the new regime that we are trying to interfere, but at the same time give them the right advice and also support them in all areas, especially financial and also from the food point of view. And also I think it is important that eventually one will have to recognize, and I think the best thing that has happened is that even the the countries of the US and the Western countries have also decided in order to activate their embassies in Afghanistan. And I think that is the first step towards sort of a recognition ultimately. But what they needed now would be, they would be present in order to help them out. So I think that is also a very positive development that has taken place. So I think on the whole what we should see is that the people of Afghanistan do not suffer. They are provided with the relief which is necessary. At the same time, their monetary conditions, their financial conditions improve, and Afghanistan starts in some ways generating funds for themselves rather than remain dependent on the world forever.
Okay, Mr. Bhatti, I'll come to you. As General Talat has just alluded to the fact that it shouldn't give an impression to the Afghans that the foreign countries are trying to interfere in their internal affairs, but there were certain promises which were made in the Doha peace deal by the Afghan Taliban and the United States. So when those promises have been met, so there are certain conditions, of course, attached. And of course, we have got an audio message by interim Afghan government spokesperson, Mr. Sohail Shaheen. He is looking up to the international community, specifically talking about the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, specifically about this Moot, and they want that international recognition. So recognition comes with certain conditions as per the Doha deal promises they have made.
Well, first of all, of course, the subject of Afghanistan is, of course, one of the core subjects to be discussed in this meeting. And as you mentioned, there were certain agreements reached in Doha between the US and the Taliban. While the Taliban have continued to go ahead and adhere to most of the conditionalities that were brought out, the agreement, the part of the agreement from the US side is yet to be fully put into place. Like they have released half of the Afghan funds which were frozen. The embargo on key personalities of Taliban leadership still is existing. The recognition is still being awaited, but it appears that the US is going to relax those sanctions and those conditionalities, and the Afghans are going to have some bit of a sigh of relief. And they have continued to commit and promise that they will allow women to work, the girls to go to schools, colleges and universities, and of course go to the offices. But right now 100% of that promise has not yet to be seen, and we have seen that around 70% plus women are now going to schools, colleges and universities and even to work, but the rest is yet to happen. However, as we know that there is a disaster waiting to happen if the world does not intervene in terms of course, food and health issues which are now being seen and experienced by the Afghan people, especially children. And this meeting, of course, is going to bring that out once again in front of the world, that besides financial assistance, the Afghan people would need food, would need health care. And of course, eventually their recognition as a nation in the world, as of course primarily that goes with the Afghan government. And of course, the key to that lies with the US, and we can just hope that while they have started to relax the conditions and those restrictions, the Afghans eventually will have a sigh of relief, and the country will become peaceful, and this region especially, and the world would be free of any source of terrorism, because right now we continue to experience some bit of terror activity emanating out of Afghanistan. We have experienced that in Pakistan, and that has been brought out to the Taliban administration. Right. But we are yet to see that this problem is killed in total. And of course, Pakistan authorities are in touch with them, and we hope that together they should be able to address this issue, and our border areas especially do become peaceful, so that people between the two countries can travel easily and meet their relatives. Right. And live in peace. So,
Mr. Bhatti, you alluded to the fact that half of the frozen funds by the US were released most recently, a couple of weeks before. It was actually $9.5 billion US dollars that came actually in aid from the US and through different agencies for the Afghan people. And after the Kabul takeover by the Taliban, it was frozen. $7 billion out of that was released, and 3.5 was actually aimed for the victims, American victims of the war on terror. So, Ms. Najma, what do you think with this release? Is it a sign, or does it give us a sense of being a precursor that slowly and gradually the US is going to ultimately recognize the Taliban as the ultimate government in Afghanistan?
I think the release, to the extent that they've done it, I mean, we also have to remember over $3.5 billion was given away to the 9/11 survivors as per a court decision. I mean, that was also something that has shocked half the world, that how did the United States give away $3.5 billion plus of central bank money, Afghan central bank money. They've released small funds to the Afghans. I'm not sure this is a precursor to recognition. I think Afghan Taliban have to do a lot more than that. But if we come to the humanitarian trust fund that has been set up by the OIC, I think there's something to think about that as well. It's almost 9 months, if not more, since the Taliban took over Afghanistan in August 16th last year. It's now end of March, around 23 million people are on the verge of needing humanitarian assistance. As per the UN figures, the World Food Programme, I think, estimates that 9 million Afghans are almost on the verge of famine. So huge help, emergency help is needed by the Islamic countries. In December, Pakistan held an emergency meeting on Afghanistan in which it was agreed that a fund would be set up. Now we have just signed the charter for this fund, so we're still talking about things. It's not clear how much money will be put together, who will put how much money into this, and when will the Afghans actually receive this money. So I think it's really important that we move away from talk and get more into the action. Afghans urgently need our help, and as a bloc, OIC needs to do much more and more urgently as well.
So Ms. Najma, there are certain nitty-gritties associated with this particular help as well. As we saw in the last extraordinary session of the foreign ministers of the OIC, which was held in Islamabad 3 months before, a humanitarian fund was established. Now today, the president of Islamic Development Bank has said that the charter has been signed for the operationalization. So how do you see this step? It's a precursor to let that aid go to the hands of the Afghan and to save them from poverty, hunger and dying.
No, of course I see it as a positive thing, but what I'm saying is we need to do much faster. We need to be much faster. We're still talking, right? So we've just signed this charter. So when will the money actually get in? It's not the first time that international countries have got together and said that they're going to put money towards something. I mean, whether it was Afghanistan earlier as well, we know several years ago, various international countries said, oh, they will send money to Afghanistan, and only a small sliver of that money actually came into Afghanistan at that time. Right now, we're in an immediate emergency need in Afghanistan, so I'm just saying that we need to be a lot faster about it. And yes, it's a good step that we've signed the charter.
Okay, and Ms. Najma, we have got an audio message from Afghan interim government spokesperson, Mr. Sohail Shaheen. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Hosting of OIC meeting by the current government of Pakistan is commendable. We view it as a positive step necessary for discussing issues of the Ummah. Secondly, I would like to say the Afghan people fought for 20 years for the liberation of their country from the occupation, and ultimately they succeeded in liberating their country. Now, when it is the phase of rebuilding and reconstruction of the country and cooperation with other countries, now it is the obligation of the member countries of OIC as an ummah to recognize the government of the Islamic Emirate and help us in rebuilding and reconstruction of Afghanistan.
Right, there was Sohail Shaheen, the spokesperson for the Afghan interim government, which is led by the Taliban. So, General Talat, what do you think about? He has said that it is the obligation of Muslim Ummah to recognize the Afghan Taliban government over there.
Well, I think it has been the demand of the Taliban government from the very beginning that they want recognition. Because without recognition, obviously, they will not have the advantages of being part of the international community, and the funds will not be released to them, and they will not be treated at par, anywhere, whether it be any organization, whether it be a UN organization or otherwise. So I think it's extremely important that they are recognized, and I think Pakistan government's plan is to sort of promote their recognition. But the fact is that they also have to comply with certain basic standards of conduct, which we are expecting that they would do. They have relaxed, they have sort of introduced in the schools and not at the college level, and they are allowing the women or the girls to take part or to attend the schools and the colleges, but not to the extent that it should have been. And there are other also areas in which they need to sort of comply to international standards of conduct. So I think that is extremely important from their own point of view, and also from the point of view of how they to satisfy the people of Afghanistan. There is no doubt that they have been able to bring peace within Afghanistan. But you can bring peace through two means. One is that you sort of by force implement peace. But there is another way of doing that, which is much more acceptable and is a part of the democratic process, is to have the people feel the way that they are a part of a society. So I think they also need to sort of include those people who have been set aside because of the past sort of conflict that took place.
That is very much attached to the inclusivity, the inclusive government over there to take all the stakeholders in that particular government, and that was one of those promises in the Doha peace deal as well. So talking about today's statement by Prime Minister Imran Khan during his keynote address, he said, let's help the Afghans and include them in the international community. That is what exactly Suhail Shaheen has requested from the OIC in particular as well. Now, when we talk about including Afghans in the international community, with a given fact that the US and the Western allies are not that much ready to accept them so quickly. Do you think after the passing of the resolution against Islamophobia at the UNGA, if the OIC decides later on in months from now in order to recognize Taliban as the ultimate government in Afghanistan, do you think that would have a weight on the United Nations and the Western powers?
Certainly, certainly. I think it will really change the context altogether, because you see the Islamic world, all the Muslim countries, are also seeing that there were major shortcomings as far as the Taliban were concerned. So I think once they overcome their shortcomings and they conform to international standards of conduct, so I think that will help them also for recognition by other countries other than the Muslim countries. So I think it's extremely important that the Muslim countries take the initiative or the lead in recognizing them, and it should be followed by the international community. So I think that's a good thing, and this would be quite a major achievement. And I think it will also help not only Afghanistan, but it will also help other countries which surround Afghanistan.
Exactly.
Because you see, the behavior of a government is also dependent on how the others look at it and how the others conduct their relationship with Afghanistan. So I think it will help to moderate them. It will help to open them to a society, because there are many leaders which are at the top today in Afghanistan have had no contact with the world,
with the outside world,
with the outside world. So if you open the world to them, I think their conduct will be different.
So, Mr. Bhatti, what do you think about recognizing the Afghan Taliban's government in Afghanistan in the light of today's statement by Prime Minister Imran Khan? And is there any sort of a likelihood that after the request by Suhail Shaheen, the OIC could deliberate on this particular thing, that OIC as a united front in order to avert the economic and the humanitarian crisis the Afghan people actually are faced with, they should give a certain conditional recognition to Afghanistan for now?
Well, you see, most of the countries in the region surrounding Afghanistan are members of the OIC as well. And they otherwise get directly affected by the situation in Afghanistan. And right now, we just talked about inclusivity in the Afghan or Taliban government. That is yet to happen. That is something which the world is looking forward to, especially the US. And then, of course, the rights of women are, we can see that that have fairly improved. And at the same time, the most important aspect is the possibility of terror being emanating out of Afghanistan. We know that Daesh or Al Qaeda is at the moment inactive, but TTP is quite active, and Pakistan is one of those countries which has been directly is still being affected by that. So that is something which Taliban are yet to attend to. And I think when the Prime Minister talks of letting Afghan be accepted and of course be recognized, I think and of course the OIC members helping Afghan government to sort out their issues and become eligible for international recognition. With that, I think the OIC countries in the region who can play a role, who can help assist Afghanistan, the Taliban specifically, to develop an inclusive setup so that they become more acceptable. Also assist them in maintaining law and order within the country, and also fight the terrorist elements. And if that can happen within next few months, I think the Taliban government would be eligible and acceptable for international recognition by not just the US but rest of the world.
So Ms. Najma, when we talk about recognizing the Afghan Taliban government in Afghanistan, if OIC can take a united front and recognize them, but when we talk about the Doha peace deal and the conditions it comes up with, first of all the inclusive government and the women's rights, and then we talk about ensuring that the Afghan soil is not being used against any other country. So of course there is a lot of time which is required for these conditions to be met. It might take years, but on the contrary, we see Afghans might die of hunger, they might go deep into more poverty as well. So do you think it is sane at this point in history to attach all those conditions in order to give them recognition so that the humanitarian and the economic crisis could be averted?
Okay, well, I think I would turn the question back to you and say that if there are some basic requirements asked of the Afghan government, A, inclusivity, and B, women, I mean, is that such a difficult task for the Afghan government to do? And therefore, if it does it, it should get recognition. So it just needs to do that. And I think to expect that we should give recognition with no terms, we're part of a new world, and we cannot move back to the 1990s Taliban, and neither can Afghanistan, and neither can Afghani women. They have a basic right to education, they have a basic right to go to work, I'm referring to the women, and the government should be an inclusive one, should incorporate every part of society. I think these are basic requirements, and it doesn't cost the Afghan government too much to actually do this. And as soon as it's done it, I think it's imperative that the United Nations and the world recognizes Afghanistan when it meets these two conditions.
So, Ms. Najma, when we talk about, I would like to contest on this because it's easier said than done, because the kind of culture in Afghanistan and over the last 2 decades, not in fact 2 decades, over the last 4 decades, it has seen the horrors of war. There are a lot of splinter groups, the insurgent groups, and then there are new stakeholders coming in as well. So it is very difficult to take all the stakeholders on board that quickly. But when we talk about people dying of hunger, it happens just within a nick of seconds.
I'm not saying that we shouldn't help Afghanistan. Obviously, we should be helping Afghanistan on a humanitarian level. But the assumption that you're giving is that if it's recognized, Afghanistan will no longer suffer from hunger, and I don't agree with that assumption. Even if it is recognized, it will need money, and it will need money to help. And increasingly, I mean, I recently met World Bank people, and they're saying that we are now once again speaking to Afghanistan. We understand it is a humanitarian issue, and we are starting to do things about it. So I think we have to separate the two out, and we have to focus on the humanitarian. That has to be done ASAP. On the other hand, Afghanistan itself and the government there needs to do work on inclusivity and sending women back to schools and colleges. And there is no justification to stop women from going to colleges.
General Talat, I'll come to you with this very point. As you have heard Ms. Najma saying that it's not hard for the Afghan Taliban to let the women acquire education and to bring all the stakeholders to form an inclusive government. But on the other hand, we see that the people are faced with poverty and dire hunger. Now, when we talk about specifically the recognition, it comes with the channeling of those funds. They would be going in the hands of a legitimate, recognized government. So it would become easier for them to look into all these matters. What do you say?
Well, I think we have to understand that the West at the moment, and especially the US, is trying to leverage the assistance by trying to change the policies of the Taliban government. They have been able to some extent, been able to sort of modulate their policies as a consequence of the sanctions that have been imposed. But at the same time, I think we have to realize that the Taliban are people or leaders, they have a leadership which is quite willing to sort of stick to their position and make the people of Afghanistan sacrifice, including themselves, which they have been doing in the past. So it is nothing unusual for them to go through very difficult conditions. But at the same time, we do not want Afghanistan and the people of Afghanistan to continue to remain in poverty and to continue to remain under such stress. So it's very important that the Afghan government also realizes that if it wants to be a part of the international polity or community, it has to really bend or to relax its policies. It cannot remain an island in this world of ours. It is harming itself, and it is also not giving confidence to its neighbors or to the world. So I think there has to be give and take, and I would say that at this stage, because it is the Afghans which are losing, they have to be more flexible, they have to give in, and they have to conform to international standards of giving respect to women, giving them the opportunities for the children to get education, and also for their people to avoid hunger and hardship.
So, Mr. Bhatti, Prime Minister Imran Khan recently urged the international community to separate Afghan people and the Afghan interim government of the Taliban, and then look into the humanitarian and the economic crisis that the Afghan people are actually faced with. Now, when we talk about this particular statement, don't you think once you've helped them out, there should be help in either the short term, you can give them the funding, but that could be for a very limited specific time. But once you recognize a government over there, it will give them the leverage to start the projects with the other neighboring countries, especially when we talk about the dividends of the regional connectivity as well.
Well, you see, we are right now stuck in this argument that it's only recognition which is going to help them counter this or tread over this humanitarian crisis. But I think the situation is very clear from this point of view, that the world identifies and recognizes the Afghan situation as a humanitarian crisis, both in terms of food and health. And if that is recognized and the Afghan people are helped so that nobody dies of hunger, nobody dies of disease, and without having been attended to, I think the situation in Afghanistan is going to improve to quite an extent. However, when it comes to the national reconstruction, rebuilding, their institutions and bringing the country up economically, that of course will require recognition. And for that, of course, the Taliban had agreed in Doha for certain conditions, which 7 months have passed, which are yet to be fully fulfilled. And however, we see that the US especially has accepted that situation to an extent, and they have released funds, and they are prepared to move on that road and eventually do recognize, but that will of course take time. And they have this leverage, as I just mentioned, for against the Taliban, where the Taliban would be encouraged or coaxed into a situation where they do include other stakeholders amongst themselves, and of course let the women come up as per their promise, and of course ensure that the Afghan soil is not used against anyone in the region or in the world. So, I think first thing we need to focus is that humanitarian assistance in terms of food and health must go there, and of course, the regional players, especially OIC countries, should help Taliban in developing or formulating inclusive government, because they all have stakes, they all have their own influence within Afghanistan. They can help the Taliban achieve that new situation, and of course, also help them in committing or other two conditions, that is the rights of women, and of course, denying the Afghan soil to any terrorist group against any other regional country.
Okay, Ms. Najma, there could be peace spoilers which wouldn't want the Afghan government to be recognized. We've seen them at play, and our high-ranking officials, including Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi, especially during the peace and reconciliation efforts before the Kabul takeover by the Taliban, had been consistently pointing towards the peace spoilers. So they might be at play at this time right now as well, to not let the Taliban to establish a complete writ over every part of the country.
Of course, there's peace spoilers, and we all know that. But when you're referring to, and one of the peace spoilers are obviously the TLP and the attacks that they're doing. I mean, we're talking about international players, but also local players, right? TLP affects Pakistan. We've seen a surge of attacks on Pakistan since the Afghanistan government came into power. And we actually expected them to take control of them much more, and we haven't seen that happen. So there's that element. But then second element is when it comes to recognition, the Taliban government can do a lot more on other fronts apart from the peace spoilers. So we know the peace spoilers exist, the Taliban government knows that the peace spoilers exist, but they don't have to just control the country. When it comes to international recognition, they just need to deliver on some of the Doha agreements, not even all of them. I'm saying just deliver on some of them. And then recognition will come despite the peace spoilers. Peace spoilers are not likely to disappear from Afghanistan very quickly, and they exist in Pakistan as well.
So, Jalta, what do you say about peace spoilers? I mean, they wouldn't want the Afghan Taliban government to be recognized, and they might be creating a lot of trouble for them over there, since that promise, according to the Doha peace deal, not letting them to fulfill that promise as well, that the Afghan soil shouldn't be used against any other country.
Well, I think they are there, but I think we have to overcome that, because we cannot be dictated by these spoilers. And I think the people of Afghanistan should not suffer as a result of the spoilers. So I think the international community's responsibility is to pursue policies which will ultimately help the people of Afghanistan, and also give recognition to the government, so that the government is in a position to really optimize its functioning. Otherwise, it will not be able to, because if it is not recognized, then it will not have any external support the way it should. It needs it so desperately at this point of time. So I think taking all these aspects as a whole, it's extremely important that they are recognized, and then of course their behavior can be modulated or moderated, right, still by the international community, because the international community, especially the US and world powers, are so experienced in influencing governments. We have that experience over the years, and so have so many other developing countries. So it is nothing unusual. In this case, of course, it would be much more. So I would expect that Afghanistan should be recognized, and the international community and friends of Afghanistan, like Pakistan, should, in a very sensitive, realizing the sensitivities of the Taliban government, keep on advising them, to conduct in a way which is beneficial for the people of Afghanistan.
Right, Mr. Bhatti, how do you see the role of peace spoilers at this point in history, after the new government is there in charge of the war-torn country for the last 4 decades?
Well, I think their role has subsided to quite an extent, but they do exist, and we've seen that they have been claiming responsibility of terror acts outside Afghanistan, which means that they're still active and they're still functional. and they are in a position to create trouble, not for the regional countries alone, but for Afghanistan itself. However, we have also seen that they have not been very active within Afghanistan. But that was not the part of the Doha deal. Doha deal said that the soil should not be used against any countries of the region or of the world, especially the US allies. So, I think the spoilers do have a role at the moment for the world to see that has Taliban government become eligible for recognition or not, and can it control the country, can it control its territory in a manner that it is not used against other countries. So, this is an area which of course the Taliban government will have to work on, and while humanitarian assistance should not be linked with this, but this is a hurdle which is a major hurdle for Afghan government or the Taliban government to cross before they become eligible for recognition. Because right now, if the OIC does come up with a recommendation or a unified recognition, I think that will also be looking at this aspect of the Taliban eligibility or qualification, whether or not they should be recognized.
Right. Mr. Bhatti, I'll come back to you. I'm now joined by another guest from the UK, Dr. Aqab Malik, who is a foreign affairs expert. Dr. Malik, thank you very much for your time at PTV World during this special live transmission regarding the 48th Council of Foreign Ministers of the OIC that is being held in Islamabad for these 2 days. A host of issues, including Islamophobia, the situation in Afghanistan, the situation in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and then the economic global economic contraction, and a number of other issues are being discussed. How significant do you think this particular moot is given the fact that a couple of days before it was Pakistan that moved the resolution at the UNGA, which was adopted by consensus to combat Islamophobia on behalf of the OIC?
I think that when we talk about Islamophobia, it's a worldwide issue, especially in the West, no doubt. It's in England. I think, although most of the time I was in Pakistan over the past decade or so, as it rose, I wasn't around to really experience it. But I've seen a drastic change in England compared to what it was like prior to the time. Although I think it's more also related to general racism as opposed to just specifically Islamophobia. But the wars of the last 20 years in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, and Libya have really compounded issues, and the perceptions of people here have been brainwashed in a way because of information dissemination which has been targeted towards achieving strategic aims of the West in those Muslim countries. And as a result, the long-term effect is when you cripple the mind of people to make them perceive foreigners, and especially people from Muslim environments, in a negative way, that's not going to stop overnight. You've just socially conditioned them towards thinking that way. And that has a long-term impact in the way generally people react with people of a different color, especially Muslims who are predominantly non-white. So as a result, you can imagine these people would reach significant positions in society, whether it's in politics and government, in business, etc., and civic society, and have warped opinions and subjective biases against the Muslim population, which would then compound the situation even further because of the way they act and behave in senior positions. And that further aggravates the situation in the West. I mean, this is when I was in the States a few years ago, because when I was completing my a book on geostrategic issues, in fact, as a Fulbright scholar, I witnessed the polarization of that society there, especially because of what Trump was saying and his victimization of the Muslim minority in the United States. Now, I personally didn't feel anything. I even went out and wandered into Trump rallies, just see and observe them, because obviously I'm not part of that. but I wanted to see how people act and behave. And largely, people are just very easy to get on with. But the whole mass, when it gets together, has a certain different dynamic altogether. And this is where perceptions are changed, unfortunately, to the detriment. And I think that it's going to be very, very, very difficult to change that back again, such as the polarization of society in the United States, which has been thoroughly divided. It won't change that easily. It won't be healed that quickly. It'll take generations again. And I think that's increasing around the world.
Dr. Malik, of course, you're right that the perceptions can't be changed overnight, and it took many years for the Western media, in order to inculcate that very perception among the people in the West, and then Muslims were being seen with suspicion. But passing of this resolution, of course, has a symbolic significance. Of course, it will come with an implementation phase as well. So passing of this resolution, of course, the perceptions can't be changed overnight, but it will definitely send across a message that the Muslims stand united when it comes to the rising incidents of Islamophobia and this particular scourge to be dealt with.
Yeah, you're right to an extent, but does the West really take any account of this? I never really see any media attention given to OIC meetings in the West. I mean, it's only when I was in Pakistan that I really recognized what was going on, because we had more attention about it. Now, when you're in the West, they're more concerned with their own particular problems. It's the same in all medias in the West. For example, now Ukraine is a big issue, yet Kashmir, Palestine is still there. And I keep writing these blogs, for example, on the internet and Facebook and Twitter and other places to indicate, look, have you forgotten about Iraq and Afghanistan and the hypocrisy of it all? The fact of the matter is, I don't think they care. And because they are in a dominant position. So this is where we have to recognize that the Muslim world has to come to a more dominant position. And the only way it can do this is, as the EU has done, unite, not to divide. And the only way unity can occur is through such meetings. But we can't just have people talking. Actions and actions speak louder than words in every which way. And when we are told about actions, what are the actions of the Muslim countries with each other? They generally, inherently now, are more conflictual between each other than they are cooperation. And they're more cooperative towards the West than they are to each other. How are you going to change that? By talking? No, that requires decisive action. And OIC, unfortunately, is just a mouthpiece for leaders to say and build up a perception. But the fact of the matter is, really, will it change? And let's be realistic about it. Unless there are decisive actions to inculcate some real on-the-ground money towards the Muslim community, to helping it out for social care, for social issues, to reduce conflict and make a united force in that respect, nothing's going to change, because we're all divided in real terms. That needs to change. That needs to be talked about.
Well taken, Dr. Aqab Malik, foreign affairs expert, joining me from the UK on phone. But it is because of the fact such type of moods like the OIC Foreign Ministers Conference is being held to brainstorm all those possibilities, how to create a united front, and then action phase comes later on with that sort of an execution to happen. General Talat, what do you think about this? As Dr. Malik just alluded to the fact that there are a lot of divisions amongst the Muslim Ummah, and to have that very leverage and to leave that impact on the international level, you have to have a united front.
Well, unfortunately, there are divisions. There is no doubt about it. There are divisions between, for instance, Saudi Arabia and between Iran or the Arab world or the, Iranians. And there are also differences amongst many other countries. But that aside, the fact is that, of course, the OIC should also help in trying to bring these countries together. And I think there is an effort which is going on simultaneously or in parallel that these differences are mitigated. And as you know, there has been also meetings amongst these leaders or at least their number twos or their foreign ministers or their deputy foreign ministers, trying to see how they can move forward and bring about unity. So that is also one aspect in which the OIC must also focus, because the greater the unity, the greater would be the weight of the OIC. And also the individual countries, because what is happening is that when you have conflicts like these, you cannot see inwards, so you cannot focus on the people of your own country. So, and you really sort of spend a lot and waste money and resources towards conflict. So I think that is also important, and you also lose your image globally, and also give an opportunity to other countries like major powers, whether it is US or whether it is Russia or whether it is any other country, to sort of play against each other and sort of benefit from that and then get influenced by them. So what is happening then? I think it is also important, and this is one message which should go in from here, that the Muslim countries are at the present moment also economically and financially very much dependent on the foreign countries. They are not self-generating. Even the ones who are extremely rich as far as resources are concerned, the exploitation of their resources is done by foreign countries. And the reason is that the level of education, and especially technology, science and technology, that has not really permeated in the student community or the communities of the Muslim world. So I think there are several areas in which the Muslims have lagged behind. There was a time in the 16th century, for instance, when the Muslims were at their zenith. But since then, there has been a continuous sort of a decline or decay. So what we need now is that there is a resurgence of that spirit, and that resurgence of the spirit has to come from within the nations and then within the community of the Islamic world. So if you are going to sort of really think that this organization has to really prove its mettle, then there has to be an inward sort of a look at your own self and also at your other brother Muslim countries, and then try to see what are your weaknesses and overcome those, and then also develop greater bonds and try to reduce conflict within the Muslim world.
Mr. Bhatti, what do you say? That is exactly what Janath al-Masood has alluded to, the fact that the internal divisions should be overcome. And Prime Minister Imran Khan, in his recently published article in the Arab News, also urged the Muslim community to overcome these internal divisions. How can Muslim countries form that united front? What are those strategies do you think are viable?
See, first of all, we all need to put our own houses in order, which makes us weak. And then, of course, our weakness becomes a leverage for the other powers to exploit us, to direct us in a particular direction that they want us to go. And that is how we experience that Muslim countries are disunited, they are weak, they can be exploited, they can be pitched against each other, they can squander their resources, their wealth, and that is what we have witnessed in over the last 40-50 years. And if we are able to, of course, put our own house in order, focus on our own development, especially development of our own people, I think our dependence on the West will reduce and our conflicts will also be resolved, and which is going to make us strong, which is going to help us unite, and we will be able to overcome our differences and truly make this organization OIC a potent, effective organization which can play its due role in the world. Because right now, with 57 members, after the UNO, it is the largest intergovernmental organization in the world. And unfortunately, it has not been able to play its role with the wherewithal that it has. And that wherewithal is weak just because of our own differences. And just because we are politically, economically, technologically weak.
Ms. Najma, when we talk about the internal animosities and the scale of divisions among the Muslim countries, going back into history, as General Talat Masood alluded to the fact, during the 16th century, it were Muslims which were at their zenith. Then we saw the Renaissance in the European continent, and there was technological and scientific advancement over there. But later on, we see the World War I happening, World War II happening, the 30 Years' War happening, a long list of wars happening among the European countries despite that technological and scientific advancement. So we don't see any sort of a division or of conflict of that scale of a World War I or World War II among the Muslim countries. So what stops them to form consensus on issues of mutual concern?
Well, I think that, Talat Saab mentioned the fact that there's no science and technology education being spread amongst the Muslim countries. Our divisions are because we're weak and we're poor. I mean, Bhatti Saab referred to the fact that after the UN, this is the largest organization, number of countries in one organization, 57 countries. We also have 25% of the world's population. We have 20% of the world's area. Yet you have no unity on ideas. So, for example, the Kashmir issue and the Palestinian issue have both been under the OIC for, OIC was created in 1969, and these issues predate the OIC. And OIC has taken position, a nominal position, but within the countries itself, we've seen that nobody has followed through. So, for example, if we take the Kashmir issue, when 5th of August 2019 happened, less than 2 weeks later, the UAE awarded Narendra Modi their highest honor. I think it was the award of Zia or something along these lines. If we take the Palestinian issue, we have the Abrahamic Accords now being signed by various countries in the GCC, right, where it was Bahrain and then UAE and so on. So there's no unity on how to approach particular issues. And because of that, we're seeing this whole area for every country doing what it wants to do, because it sees its national interests in different ways. I think the Prime Minister also alluded to this today when he said that we need to take a united front, for example, on the Russia-Ukrainian crisis. The OIC can only punch above its weight or even at its weight when it takes united approach on issues and countries believe in that issue.
Okay, I'm now joined by another guest, Dr. Zia Ul Haq, who is director at CASS. And Dr. Haq, thank you very much for your time at this particular transmission. As we speak, the 48th session of the Council of Foreign Ministers of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation is underway. We've just seen the inaugural session ending with the keynote speech by Prime Minister Imran Khan. What major takeaways did you have from this keynote address by Prime Minister Imran Khan?
Thank you very much for inviting me over. And I think it's very significant for Pakistan and Pakistan's leadership, which has been striving for so long for the unity in Ummah. And personally, for Prime Minister Imran Khan, who has been at the forefront of forging unity among the Ummah and making OIC effective. Unfortunately, OIC has not been seen, at least, as effective as it should have been. I mean, 57 Islamic countries, as Ma'am was saying, over 25% of world's population and unaccounted wealth as far as hydrocarbons is concerned, and a huge mass of very potent manpower. But we've not been able to assert as a united front, which is a dream of Prime Minister Imran Khan. Unfortunately, it pains me when I say that this unity will not come. Unfortunately, Muslim Ummah will not get united on any issue. On any issue.
Dr. Zia, I beg to contest very humbly on this very point. Recently, we have seen Pakistan moved a resolution at the United Nations General Assembly to combat Islamophobia. There have been rising incidents of Islamophobia across the globe, and especially as Prime Minister Imran Khan repeatedly has mentioned that after 9/11, Muslims across the globe were being seen with suspicion. Now, OIC was the platform on the behalf of which Pakistan moved that very important resolution, which has been dubbed by Prime Minister Imran Khan, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi also as the landmark resolution So if they can form a united front regarding Islamophobia, what makes you say that there won't be any unity among the Muslim Ummah on other issues?
I wish you had given me 5 seconds more, because I was coming exactly on this very point. That
Please go ahead.
if
Please go ahead.
if one person could persuade them to come on one point and put up this into UNGA and get this resolution adopted as 15th March being the day for Islamophobia, then why can't we have the united front on other issues which are more contentious or far older than the phenomena of Islamophobia? That is Kashmir and Palestine. So what I wanted to say was that unless somebody takes the lead and makes a concerted effort, especially on that particular point. For example, if Kashmir is to be taken, then it should be at one time only Kashmir. Somebody should be hankering about unity for Kashmir. If it is Palestine first, then we can take Palestine first. But once we start to diverse the issues and put too many issues in front of 57 countries, then it becomes very, very difficult. Then it becomes only the passing of resolutions in the OIC summits or the foreign ministers' meetings. Islamophobia movement led by Imran Khan for the last 3 years, as I am saying, was a very concerted and a coordinated move, which then everybody got convinced on and then moved the resolution in UNGA. So if this model is adopted by rest of the Islamic countries and the others, there are big leaders in Ummah, if they pick up 1 point each and spearhead it, then inshallah ta'ala a point will come that slowly and gradually we will start to strike down the number of agenda items which have proliferated after 1969 inaugural session of OIC in Rabat. I mean, Palestine and Kashmir was there already, but then so many things have added to the list where Ummah needs to join hands and make a united front. I mean, if you have listened to the speeches of the African leaders, I think their concerns are very genuine. The poverty and the rise in extremism, the places like Nigeria. So we need to confront the issues, take them head on, but there should be mechanism where one head of state or one head of government picks up one agenda item and continues to pursue it till such time that it's achieved and accomplished in a successful manner. And the model is here in front of us. Imran Khan took it upon himself as far as Islamophobia was concerned. He took the Kashmir issue also, but obviously it has many other dimensions. Islamophobia, the way he
Dr. Zia Ul Haq,
pursued
your
it
point is very,
last.
very well taken. You're mentioning a very crucial point over here. I'd like to bring that point to the rest of the panelists in the studio. So, General Talat, as Dr. Zia Ul Haq just mentioned, that first of all, it is OIC taking up too many matters at once. So it renders it weak to focus its concerted efforts on a certain specific agenda, just the way they did on Islamophobia. Do you agree with this point?
Not totally. In a way that let's look at it very objectively. How can you ignore the conditions which the Kashmiris are at the moment experiencing? How the Afghans are experiencing? And many other countries. And look at the situation, economic situation of many of the Muslim countries. Look at the impact of the pandemic on the Muslim countries. So So it is impossible to say that, you know, you will only pursue one point and that is the end of it, and every country should choose one point. No, this is not possible. This is true. I agree with that you should not get involved in too many things. But the OIC is not getting involved in too many things. They are focusing, in fact, the ones which need to be focused, like Kashmir, like Palestine and all, they have been ignored because other issues had come up, like for instance terrorism and so on. So did we really focus on terrorism? We also did not focus on terrorism. In any case, the responsibility of taking action rests with the country itself. You know, like for instance, as far as Kashmir is concerned or terrorism is concerned, it is for countries like Afghanistan, Pakistan and all those who are directly affected. It is for them to focus, but obviously we can get assistance from others in terms of you know, funding or something like that for Afghanistan. So I think these are issues which need a much broader sort of a vision in order to understand and pursue. And what is needed is that you should also focus internally. I would advise that the Muslim countries must also focus internally in terms of democratic development, in terms of representative development, if not democratic development, in terms of economic you know, growth, so that they are not economically dependent on the West or other countries, China or Russia. So I think these are fundamental things which will give them the independence and their voice will be heard. If you are dependent on others, if you are dependent on America or Russia or China, and then you keep on saying big things, then nobody is going to listen to you, and they will say, well, you yourself are so much dependent on others. So I think there are multiple things, and all this cannot be achieved overnight, and we have to focus on education. For instance, I mean, education, health and all, and infrastructure are so fundamental for the growth of any country. True. And it is these which will give us the strength. So I think it is the internal strength of these countries which is built by all these actions over a period of time and through good leadership and through cooperation within the country. Now, if the countries themselves are so conflictual, if they are fighting internally so much, they are already very weak, and they are dissipating their energy, you know, in internal fighting. So I think they also have to understand, look, Syria, Libya, and I can quote so many other countries in Africa and so on, which are under severe internal strife. And look at the condition of those people. Look at the number of migrants that are moving from one country to other. They run into millions, you know.
But General Talat, do you think there is a bitterness in history as well? After the World War II ended and we saw most of the colonies which were freed by the from the foreign subjugation. So there are a lot of books which are mentioning this very particular point, that the lines on the maps were not drawn on the basis of the ground realities, but rather the colonizers drew those lines by sitting in their own rooms. So that actually did some sort of injustice with the proper division of the lands. That's why we see so much conflict happening. For example, we talk about the Middle East and the Africa's Sahel region as well. Yes, as well, Kashmir as well.
Yeah, there is no doubt about it. But you know, why were they?
What's the solution to
the solution
correct that mistake, that geographical delineation of the
So what we
boundaries?
have to understand is that those geographical mistakes were made because there was a certain weakness in those communities. So they exploited that. If they were not weak, it would not have been possible for them to exploit that. So whatever the conditions were in the past, now in order to overcome them, you can't just say that those will be put right just like that. You have to, whatever you have to full maximize or actualize your full potential or maximum potential, which we are not doing. In fact, we are wasting too much of our energy and dissipating it in other wasteful activities.
So, Mr. Bhatti, do you think that geographical injustice which has been done to the Muslim countries in particular after the World War II or when the colonies were freed, can that be corrected right now with the slogan or the very tenet of Islam that Muslim Ummah is just like a body and there shouldn't be divisions and they should hold tight to the rope of Allah? Is that a solution for the contemporary world for the Muslims?
Well, you see, wherever we find that there are such issues, then it is up to the 2 countries or 3 countries in the region or immediate neighborhood who are experiencing this conflict to resolve it. And the OIC is a platform, it's a forum which is available who can help them in resolving this issue and help them address their sensitivities. And I think it can be done. And this organization actually provides a forum for such like situations. And we have also seen that whenever there is a complex or a serious issue which the OIC is facing, then they create a contact group, like there is a contact group existing on Kashmir. So, which can of course take up this issue and pursue it all the time and of course make quick progress instead of waiting for sessions of the summit meeting or for the foreign ministers conference. So, I think if the OIC or any of the member countries does come across such a situation where it needs additional effort, then of course the OIC can look into it, and in case it affects more than one member, they can create a contact group and help the 2 countries or more than 2 countries solve their differences and solve their issues.
Mr. Bhatti, your point is well taken. I am now joined by another guest in this live transmission, Mr. Afzal Khan, who is the Member of the Parliament from the UK. He's joining me on the phone. Mr. Afzal Khan, thank you very much for your time at PTV World. We really appreciate that. So starting off with the significance of this OIC moot, and specifically when we talk about the Kashmir dispute that has been lingering for decades now between Pakistan and India, happens to be the flashpoint, and this has been raised at the podium of the United Nations General Assembly by Prime Minister Imran Khan as well. There is an OIC contact group on Kashmir, and there is a likelihood a resolution of the ministerial level could be passed in, which is aimed at those elements which know the ground reality in occupied Kashmir yet remain silent on it.
Yes, yes. Well, Jawad Bhai, thank you very much for having me, and it's a pleasure. First of all, I think it's important for Pakistan having the 48th conference of OIC in Pakistan. Pakistan is a founding member, and of course, the issue you touched on Kashmir. I think the truth is this block of OIC is actually a very powerful block, and again, what we have seen over these years. They've never been punching their weight. So they should seriously look at themselves and say, well, how can we punch our weight in the global context and the many challenges that we face? And the question on Kashmir itself, I think probably a good contrast at this stage is what exactly is happening with Ukraine. We've seen how in Ukraine, one sovereign country has invaded another sovereign country, and how the West generally has been able to mobilize the world opinion, and also the actions they have taken, unprecedented. Nothing like this can be seen before. So it shows you the potential, what can be done. So if OIC is organized, then there are many issues that we are concerned about in the world in order to make sure the world is a fair place for all. And I think that must be the core which they must be looking at and they need to sort out. Otherwise, what you end up with is what people make a joke about, that it's a good paper churning out machine, that they're good at putting resolutions through, but the backbone of actually making any difference, making that change, they have always been weak. So I think they need to address that weakness. Their potential is huge.
Recent passing of the UNGA resolution to declare 15th of March as the International Day to Combat Islamophobia. Of course, this resolution was tabled by Pakistan, but on the behalf of the OIC. So it speaks volumes that it was not only Pakistan which was being affected or which was disturbed by the rising scourge of Islamophobia. It was other Islamic countries as well. Now, when other Islamic countries are disturbed by a certain issue and Pakistan takes the lead in order to get something consolidated done about it, and when it comes to the problem that Pakistan is faced with for the last 7 decades, that is the Kashmir dispute, do you think Pakistan can get that sort of reciprocation by other Islamic countries in order to help Pakistan to goad the conscience of the United Nations to implement its Security Council resolutions on Kashmir?
Yeah. Well, look, I think first of all, I think it's very important what has happened in the UN, where they're marking the 15th of March every year to be Islamophobia Awareness Day. This is, I think, good and it's big. We've already seen action on that. Last week, I raised a question here in the British Parliament that there's a whole issue of deep concern of Islamophobia in Britain and Europe. And what is the government going to do to make sure there are appropriate legislation to protect the Muslim community? Just this morning, right now, I've just come back from GMB, which is the second largest trade union, to speak to them about Islamophobia. And they have unanimously passed this resolution of accepting the definition, which is the first thing going forward. So I welcome this. And I think this also shows that when we work together, we can move things. We can make that change which is needed. So I think this should be used as a building block of other issues and concerns that we have, which are concern the Muslim world and the world at large.
So, Mr. Khan, Ms. Najma, who is also participating in today's special live transmission, she earlier mentioned that there were certain Muslim countries which were extending ties with India despite knowing the ground situation and the atrocities and the brutalities it is committing, especially after the 5th of August in 2019, when it deprived the occupied valley of its special status and revoked the Article 370 and 35A. How do you think those elements of those countries could be impressed upon to have that realization that it is a nuclear flashpoint and they need to listen to the serious concerns of the Pakistani authorities regarding Kashmir?
Yeah. Well, look, there are issues. I didn't want to go too much into those issues. The reality at the end of the day is this, that if you look at many of the Arab world countries, their treatment of Palestine cause, which should be close to their heart, has been actually poor. So then comes the Kashmir issue. Again, the central point I would say is, look, if you have strong relationships, then that has an impact. People then think about it, that people are more likely to listen to you and more likely to act on what you're saying. And when you don't have that, well, each country is running for their own national interest without really considering the consequences in the wider context of the world peace and the human rights and the idea of resolving issues. So that, I think, is the key. So we need to strengthen our relationship within the OIC so that there is much better flow of information and understanding of what is happening and the understanding how we can work together to make that difference. That, I think, is probably the best way forward, instead of just slating some of those countries who want to avoid Modi and give contracts economically to India.
So, Mr. Afzal Khan, we saw after the revocation of Article 370 and 35A, this issue was raised at the United Nations Security Council after many, many years, not once, but in fact twice. This issue was raised at the European Union Parliament as well as in the UK Parliament. There was a lot of hue and cry about these illegal and unilateral actions of India to change the disputed status of illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. But we haven't seen anything concrete happening from these blocs or countries in order to either sanction India in terms of economy or do something else about it. We saw the human rights organizations, including the Amnesty and the Human Rights Watch, giving the genocide alerts, but nothing concrete happened on the ground. Till date, we see there is a continuous curfew and the complete communication blackout over there, especially given the fact when there was COVID-19 pandemic. The entire world was grappling with COVID-19 pandemic, and there was nothing done by the United Nations nor by the Western powers in order to avert that crisis that the Kashmiris are faced with.
I mean, you're right to point this out, and I think it's correct to say that all these different forums, this issue of Kashmir has been regularly been brought forward to highlight the atrocities that are taking place. But I think we must also acknowledge the stark reality, what has been happening on the ground, and that is that those forces of power in the UN have always used UN when it suited their national interest. The UN itself never has the key. And that is the problem on the UN level. But on the country front, let's look at Britain itself, who has a long history with this issue, who have a moral responsibility. And not only that, they have millions of people who belong to Kashmir, Pakistan, and India who are actually citizens of their country, who are affected by this dispute. But again, when you raise this issue, what happens is they simply say this is a bilateral matter between India and Pakistan. Now, they can't carry on hiding behind this. After the 370 and 35A revocation in the Constitution of India, India has become an occupying force. There's no ifs and buts about that. And therefore, what we need to do is, whenever this comes to light, and Ukraine is, again, I would say, a good example, our position has to be very clear that we stand for rule of the law. And if that is violated in Ukraine, we will condemn that. But we will equally expect from other countries to condemn when other countries violate the international law. And in this case, we're talking about India. I think this is the way forward, not the way forward where we say, well, you don't follow that, we're not going to follow this, because that ends up with the rule of jungle. Nobody's following anything. We should try to strengthen the international law, use this opportunity, and to make sure that there are no double standards, and that we follow the international law across the board wherever it's been violated by whoever it has been violated by.
Right, Mr. Afzal Khan, a member of the parliament from the UK, joining me on phone. Thank you very much for your time at PTV World during this special live transmission. We really appreciate that. Ms. Najma, so there is a likelihood that a resolution by the OIC contact group on Kashmir could be passed. What sort of a message would it send across?
I mean, the message it would send across is that the Muslim world has a view on Kashmir, and I think it's an important message that should be sent at from every OIC meeting, despite the fact the OIC has done nothing to actually further the cause. It's still a message that needs to come out. One of the interesting things about the Islamophobia Awareness Day is that a core group was actually set up to push this. And Pakistan was obviously leading it, and then they asked for this core group, and the core group got together and they pushed it across. So I think that's an important way to push issues across. But we should be able to differentiate between Islamophobia Day and getting that passed and Kashmir and Palestine. The fact that the OIC finally supported and got together its act and was able to push the Islamophobia Day with Pakistan leading that is because it was a theoretical concept, right? So all Muslim nations benefited from that, all Muslims throughout the world benefited from that. When it comes to Palestine and Kashmir, these are practical on-ground issues. Every country has its own relationship, whether it's with Israel or whether it's with India. Getting a core group or getting a consensus on those is far more difficult, and it's unlikely to happen, to be honest. But I think any kind of a positive statement that we can get out of the OIC conference on Kashmir is still something to applaud. I would like to add one more thing. You keep talking about the Muslim Ummah as if it's one. It has never been one, right? So we should recognize that fact, because if we don't recognize that fact, and we don't recognize that even at the high point, there were many, many empires in the Muslim world, whether it was the Mughal Empire or the Ottoman Empire or the Safavids or the Persians or whatever, we won't be able to understand correctly what we need to do today. So this understanding that the Muslim Ummah has to be one is a misunderstanding. All countries, all nations, all empires always have their own interests. It's when we have that recognition that we can actually move forward and actually do things on issues that we think as a Muslim world we should unite on.
Ms. Najma, I'll humbly beg to contest on this particular thing. The concept of Muslim Ummah is something that hasn't been conceived in the contemporary world. It comes from the time when the state of Medina that Prime Minister Imran Khan often alludes to. It came from there. It's about the teachings of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him himself, that Muslims are just like one unit, and if one single part of that unit or the body is hurt, the pain runs down throughout. So it's beyond that geographical division. Don't you agree?
No, I don't. I think that the Muslim Ummah, of course, you're 100% right. It comes from when the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his small territory and his band of followers. But we're talking about people in their thousands or hundreds of thousands only, right? Now the Muslim Ummah, as we define it, is a combination of 57 countries with 2 billion people with differing nation interests. And that is why we cannot expect the Muslim Ummah. We use it in a theoretical sense when we refer to Muslim Ummah, right? The Prophet, peace be upon him, his time was totally different, so that we can't correlate it identically today. That's what I would say.
Okay, Dr. Zia Ul Haq, do you agree with the point which has been raised by Ms. Najma that the concept of Muslim Ummah being a single unit that doesn't have any practical ground as far as the contemporary world is concerned?
I think this is the same. Earlier, General Talat did not agree to that the Ummah will not agree on any one point, on any of the practical territorial disputes. And that is why Palestine and Kashmir issues resolution is not in sight. This is what Madam is precisely saying. And this is what I had said earlier also. There will be no agreement. What I am suggesting is trying something differently, that we have a model on which we have achieved success, but it was a theoretical thing, as she's saying, she's very rightly saying, Islamophobia. But in practical aspects, unless we form teams, unless we make contact groups, and they pursue it vigorously, convincing the other nations to come on a common ground. Now, please tell me, is Palestine issue not a responsibility of Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE? If Kashmir is only the responsibility of Pakistan, okay, we take it. But is Palestine is not the issue of Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt? The problem is that each of these countries are now plagued with their own issues, their own internal issues. Now, please tell me, what is Saudi Arabia pursuing at this time? Are they pursuing any specific agenda for which they need support of Islamic Ummah or the OIC countries, except Yemen war, which is not just?
Unfortunately, I'm short of time. There are two very important points that you have mentioned in this talk. First of all, Islamophobia, as you mentioned, is more of a theoretical problem. But I beg to contest on this because we have seen rising incidents of Islamophobia right in our neighbor as well. We have seen the rising incidents of Islamophobia after 9/11 over there in France as well. We saw Brenton Tarrant, white supremacist, killing over 50 Muslim worshippers in 2 mosques in New Zealand as well. So it is not a theoretical problem. And when we talk about convincing the other belligerent powers or the hegemons which are occupying certain Muslim territories like Palestine and Kashmir, we know how did India actually occupied Kashmir by the dint of force. It was the Palestinian people which was subjugated by the dint of force by the Israelis. And when you talk about certain other Muslim countries, they fought a war in 1967 and before that one as well against Israel. So do you think Muslims should form a front like on the basis of NATO, that if one certain Muslim country is attacked, so everybody should come to that defense?
No, no, war is not an option. I define war as waste of available resources, WAR. It's a waste of available resources. I recall Andrei Gromyko's famous quote, 10 years of talk is better than 1 day of war. So I'm not supporting war. When I said Islamophobia theoretical, it was in that sense, but Madam is saying that every Muslim country was getting benefited. That is why. Whereas Palestine and the Kashmir, they belong to, they line up in the practical aspects. There are ideological disputes, there are territorial disputes, and there are a multitude of disputes which have proliferated over the last 7 decades. That is why.
Dr. Zia Ul Haq, thank you very much for your time at PTV World during this special live transmission regarding the 48th session of the Council of Foreign Ministers of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Unfortunately, we are short of time. I would have loved to talk in detail about various aspects that we were already in conversation with. So for that, I beg your pardon. I have to cut you over here because of the shortage of time. Thank you for your time. And I was also joined by Lieutenant General retired Talat Masood, Senior Analyst, who was joining me in the studio. Thank you for your time and enlightening discussion on various aspects and various elements which are going to be the part of this OIC Moot. And I was also joined by Air Vice Marshal retired Mr. Ikramullah Bhatti, Senior Analyst, Ms. Najma Minhas, Senior Journalist. Thank you, all of you, for your time at PTV World. It was an enlightening discussion indeed. With this, we come to the end of this part of the special live transmission, and will continue to update regarding the major developments as and when they happen at the 48th session of the Council of Foreign Ministers of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Thank you for watching.